بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وأفضل الصلاة وأتم التسليم على سيدنا ونبينا وحبيبنا محمد سيد الأولين والآخرين إمام المتقين الهادي إلى صراط مستقيم وعلى آله وأصحابه وأتباعه إلى يوم الدين. اللهم فقهنا في وعلمنا التأويل وألهمنا رشدنا يا رب العالمين. Alhamdulillah, in our lessons on Imam Sawi's commentary on Jawharat al-Tawheed, we have reached the central investigation, arguably, on of this text, which is the attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? This is now affirming what is necessary for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And key to this, right, is to appreciate that what we affirm about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is meanings that are necessary to affirm for the divine entity, right? Because the mind conceives of the necessary existent and affirms that the existence of the necessary existence is necessary, right? Right? And as the theologians have mentioned, right, that of the ways of establishing the existence of Allah, there's basically two directions, right? One is the world is possible and it needs a necessary existent. Its existence is possible. It needs a necessary being to take it from mere possibility into existence. Or that this world is created and everything created requires a creator. Right? So what are the meanings affirmed for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Right? These are meanings that are necessary to affirm. The first of these is existence itself. Right? Existence itself. Then he goes into the other attributes according to the classical classification of the various attributes of the divine. Right? Now, the ulama have broken down the discussion on the attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in different ways, right? In different ways. The later scholars found arranging it in this particular structured manner to be particularly useful, right? But many other texts tell us first, they talk about the being of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then they go into what are called mabahith al-tanzih, affirming the transcendence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then they go into the attributes that are affirmed for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And these are just matters of classification. Right? So one example of that is, as they say, qareebul mutanawal, that is easy to access, is what the way Imam al-Ghazali broke down the discussions related to the attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Qawaid al-Aqaid, in his statement on his brief statement of Aqidah. He has a section on Tanzih, and that section on Tanzih is very, very useful, and it has many beautiful statements that would enrich our looking at what's called the Sifat al-Salbiyah, the negative attributes, right? Because the negative attributes relate to Salb ma la yaliqu bi dhatihi ta'ala. It's to negate those meanings unbefitting the divine entity. So this classification, which is chosen by the later scholars, it follows a logical order. That you first affirm that God is, and that's being. Now when you affirm that being, affirming the necessary existent, al-wajib al-wujud, it entails certain meanings, right? And it dispels certain natural misconceptions, and these are the sifat al-salbiya, the attributes of negation, and these are the mabahith al-tanzih, affirming Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's transcendence. And then after that you have the sifat al-ma'ani, the affirmative attributes, sometimes are referred to as sifat al-thubutiyya, right? Which is similar meaning, right? So there's a number of ways of classifying these. So he tells us in the poem itself, فَوَاجِبٌ لَهُ الْوُجُودُ وَالْقِدَمُ, right? So necessary for him is existence and eternity, right? And beginninglessness. كَذَا بَقَاءٌ لَا يُشَابُ بِالْعَدَمِ. And likewise, everlastingness untouched by non-existence, right? So here we read the part about فَوَاجِبٌ لَهُ الْوُجُودُ in terms of how the attributes are divided, right, into these three. Then what is the meaning of a sifa, right? Of a sifa, an attribute. So we've mentioned that an attribute has a general sense in the Arabic language. A sifa has a general usage, which is ما يوصف به الشيء, أي ما يضاف إليه, right? 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 Is a meaning ascribed to another. A meaning ascribed to another. But this is not necessarily this is not a formal definition of what an attribute is. Right? This is not a rigorous definition of what an attribute is, right? But many of the things that are ascribed to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala are sifat insofar as they are in the lexical sense. هذا معنى أضيف إلى الله تعالى. This is a meaning that Allah has ascribed something to him, right? So, and the other meaning, which is more specific, is now, right, the trickiness of defining an attribute, right, is that the sifat al-ma'ani, the affirmative attributes are straightforward, right? Because it's a meaning that is affirmed, necessarily affirmed for that al-wajib al-wujud, right? But the problem of that is that this particular definition does not encompass what? Does not encompass the personal attribute of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, wujud, right? Because, and we'll see, because the personal attribute of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, wujud, is affirmed for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but it's not a meaning beyond His being, right? So this investigation on what is the nature of the divine existence, right? And is existence even an attribute, is a lengthy discussion. The summary of it is that when we say Allah has the attribute of existence, it's right. This is a sifa insofar as we conceive of an entity and we ascribe to it the meaning of being, of actual being, right? As opposed to conceiving of an entity. So for example, a fluorescent dinosaur called C.N. Parkosaurus, right? In honor of C.N. Park, right? So C.N. Parkosaurus, which is like a Tyrannosaurus but fluorescent green, right? Can you conceive of that? Yes. But would you affirm existence for it? No. So insofar as you affirm existence for it, it's an attribute. You ascribe existence to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But existence is not anything other than affirming that He is wajib al-wujud, that He does exist, right? Right? So this discussion, Imam Asawi kind of carefully goes beyond talking about it, right? Beyond talking about it, right? And right. So why are we mentioning this? Because it comes up in some books, and there is extensive back and forth on it. A good summary, if you want to appreciate this, is given in Imam Sawi, Imam al-Bajuri's Hashia on the Sanusiyya. Right? Anytime you're wondering, okay, so what is the summary of this discussion? A very nice breakdown is what Imam al-Bajuri, this great muhaqqiq of Sunni Aqidah, ultimately not a lot arises from the intricate details of figuring out what we mean by affirming Allah's existence, beyond the fact that He is, full stop, right? So what does Imam Sawi tell us? He says, قوله الوجود. قال الإمام أحمد الصاوي رحمه الله تعالى: الوجود أي الذاتي, intrinsic existence. Right? الوجود أي الواجب الذاتي. Right? So his wujud is wajib wujuban ذاتيا. Right? الوجود الواجب. Right? So his واجب له الوجود. So his wujud is wajib. فهو واجب الوجود wujuban ذاتيا, in of itself. Because what's the ruling of your wujud? But right now, what's the ruling of it? Do you exist or not? Right now, you do exist right now, right? But your wujud right now is, your wujud is mumkin fi nafsihi, wajib wujuban aradiyan. It's contingently necessary. Right? Why? because Allah has originated you, right? So we do affirm that you do exist, but this existence is jaiz fi nafsihi, it's in itself possible, but it's called wujub aradi, contingently necessary. Your existence is necessary because Allah's لتعلق قدرة الله تعالى وإرادته بوجودك, بإيجادك. Allah's will and power related to your being in existence. So he said, وَهُوَ صِفَةٌ نَفْسِيَّةٌ. This is the personal attribute of Allah. Right? And what is the definition of a personal attribute? It's صِفَةٌ ثُبُوتِيَّةٌ. Right? It's an attribute that is affirmed. يدل الوصف بها على نفس الذات. Being characterized by it points to the entity itself. دون معنى زائد عليها. And not a meaning beyond affirming it. If you were paying attention, what have we studied where this is discussed? This is discussed in the Kharida, where he talks about wujud. A discussion arises in the commentary where Imam al-Dardir starts talking about, is wujud a sifa or not? And Imam al-Sawi has some beautiful points about that we pointed to. So you can cross-reference from that. But we won't go into it. Right? So so this is a discussion, right? That wujud simply affirms that the entity is. Is it a meaning beyond that? Right? So it's not a meaning beyond that, it's not a sifa. Right? In that sense. So that's why some of the ulama said that في اعتبار الوجود الصفة تسامح, that it's because the sifa is a meaning that is there's sifat thubutiyya and sifat salbiyya. It's either a meaning that is necessarily affirmed for Allah or a meaning that is necessarily denied for Allah, the sifat salbiyya. What are you affirming when you say wujud? Right? So some say it's not really an attribute, but but we do need to mention it first, because like that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, his entity is. So this affirming that it is attributing existence to the entity of Allah. Right? And that existence, wujud, is a meaning that is ascribed to an entity. Because you could conceive of an entity and then say, لا وجود لها. Right? So, but generally the scholars steered clear of that, right? And said, yes, it is an attribute, either expansively or بحيث, so far as we ascribe the meaning of نصف ذات الله تعالى بمعنى الوجود وبكون هذا الوجود واجبا. We ascribe this meaning of existence to the divine entity, and we affirm that this existence is necessary, so it's a sifa in that sense. فقولنا ثبوتية خرج بها الصفات السلبية كالقدم والبقاء. So saying it's affirmative excludes the negative attributes like قدم and بقاء, like being eternal and endless. وقولنا على نفس الذات, that it points to the entity itself, خرج به الصفات المعاني فإنها تدل على معنى لا على الذات, because this excludes the affirmative attributes because they indicate a meaning, not the entity itself. So like ilm, for example, indicates a meaning that the entity necessarily possesses, but it points to the attribute. وبقولنا دون معنى زائد عليها خرج المعنوية. And not a meaning beyond that, this takes out the صفات المعنوية. الصفات المعنوية هي عبارة عن قيام صفات المعاني بالذات. Right? So the scholars, some scholars only consider that there's 13 attributes. 1 affirmative attributes, 5 negative attributes, 7 affirmative attributes. صفات, these 7 are صفات المعاني. Right? Which are العلم, الإرادة, القدرة, يعني إلى آخره. Right? الحياة, العلم, القدرة, الإرادة, الكلام, السمع والبصر. Right? So هي صفات المعاني. The صفات المعنوية هي عبارة عن قيام الصفة بالذات. So if you ascribe حياة, صفة الحياة, to the ذات of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to the entity of Allah, you would, يعني الصفة المعنوية هي كونه حيا, his being living. إرادة كونه مريدا, his being willing. His power, قدرة, كونه قادرا. Allah has the attribute of kalam, so the صفة المعنوية is كونه متكلما, etc. And we will see some of the, many of the scholars said there's no need to affirm these, but they did it for multiple reasons. One of them is for clarity. Number 2, because the Mu'tazila, who are a significant sect in Islam, denied Sifat al-Ma'ani. They denied the affirmative attributes. They say Allah is qadir bidhatihi. Allah is powerful by His entity, not by an attribute called qudra. So if you only discuss these attributes, yutawaham, someone may imagine that they're denying the attribute. They're not. Then this is called ta'annut, stubbornness. They say, yes, He is qadir, He is powerful, but not by an attribute called power. They say no. There's a talazum, there's necessary. The one who is powerful, you say he has power. Say, no, we don't say that. Right? Due to certain concerns, right? واختلف في الوجود هل هو عين الموجود أو غيره. They differed on existence. Is it the existent itself or other than the existent? معنى زائد is a meaning beyond that. والذي عليه الأشعري الأول. The position of Imam al-Ash'ari is the first. That ascribing existence to Allah is simply affirming al-mawjud, الذات الموجودة, right? The entity that exists. بناء على نفي الأحوال, on the basis of negating there being أحوال, right? And this is a philosophical discussion. Those who are interested, don't read about it right now, but Ibn Kamal Basha has a treatise, and it's published with his Rasail, volume 6 or 7, related to this issue of al-ahwal, of states. وهو المعتمد, and this is the relied upon position. Don't worry about ahwal right now. لأنه لا واسطة بين الوجود والعدم عند الأشعري. Because something either exists or it doesn't. Right? There's no state between existence and others. But then فالوصف بالوجود, so ascribing existence to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala i'tibari. This is called an amr i'tibari, right? It's something that is a affirmation of consideration, right? يعتبره الشخص, a person would consider it and affirm it. لا ثبوت له أي في الخارج, right? لا ثبوت له أي في الخارج. Right? مثال ذا. So, right? So they say, right? Right? And the explanation, I wouldn't worry too much about, right? They say a wujud, right, has levels. What is affirmed, there's something that له تحقق, there's something that you can affirm externally. Right? So for example, what's the difference if we say Zaydun qa'im? Zayd, we would say that Zayd has wujud. Right? Right? And that's why they say الوجود ما له تحقق في الخارج. Right? بحيث يمكن أن يرى. It's something that has some external affirmation such that it is possible to see it. Whether you can actually see it or not is irrelevant. Right? Whereas qiyam, standing, where is standing? Right? Standing is a meaning that we consider. And if I said Hamza is standing, Hamza qa'imun, what would you say? La. Because it's a meaning that you consider and you either affirm it or you don't. Right? So qiyam is an amr i'tibari. Right? When you're looking, you're not looking at qiyam, you're looking at Hamza. Right? Now we ascribe this meaning to him. Where is the qiyam? Right? Right? That's a very simplified idea. So that's why they talk about there's different levels of affirmation of things, of wujud. Right? But we'll keep that. He gives an example. مثال ذلك كما إذا أخرجت ثوبا من صندوق مثلا. If you take some cloth out of a container, for example, فالثوب يوصف بالظهور. Now you say ظهر الثوب ظاهر. Right? Right? So the cloth is described by being manifest. وهو أمر اعتباري. وهو أي الظهور. Right? This manifestness is an أمر اعتباري. Is a matter affirmed through consideration. لا ثبوت له في الخارج بحيث يصح أن يرى, such that you could see the ظهور itself. What you're seeing is the thawb. Right? ولا في نفسه. Right? Can you conceive of seeing ظهور? Can you conceive of seeing qiyam itself? No. You can see ذات قائمة. You can see an entity that is standing, but the qiyam itself is an amr i'tibari. It is affirmed. Right? يعتبره الذهن ويثبته. The mind considers it and affirms it, but لا تحقق له في الخارج. Right? It has no external reality such that you could see it. Right? بل هو أمر يعتبره الشخص في نفسه فقط. It's a matter that is considered by a person and affirmed by them. Right? So he says وعلى هذا فتسمية الوجود صفة بناء على قول بعض المحققين. So then the issue arises that how is wujud a sifa? This based on what some of the Imams of verification have said, which is as follows: that ليس المراد بالصفة المعنى القائم بالشيء. that what's meant here by sifa, by attribute, is not a meaning that is established for something. Okay? It's not a meaning that subsists through something. And this is, of course, this is the general meaning. This is a good definition of sifa. وَالْمَعْنَى الْقَائِمْ بِالشَّيْء. Right? It's a meaning that is affirmed for something. Right? And a sifa of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, if Allah, the entity of Allah is necessary and His attributes are necessary. Right? Bal, right? Here what's meant by wujud is بل ما يحكم به عليه. Of course, you can tell Imam Sawi here is quoting from others, right? So he's more tense here, more terse here than he is usually in his writing. ما يحكم به على الذات, right? ما يحكم به على عليه أي على الشيء, right? على الشيء أي الذات, right? يعني الشيء أي الذات. So it is a matter that is affirmed for another. سواء كان عين حقيقته أو قائما بها أو خارجا عنها. Right? Whether that which is affirmed for something is the essence of its reality, or a meaning that subsists through it, which is the صفات الثبوتية أو خارجا عنها, or external to them. فدخل في هذا التعريف الوجود. So this definition of an attribute includes wujud. So here we have two definitions given by Imam Sawi in passing, and Imam Sawi does that frequently, a bit like how we saw with Shaykh Muhyiddin Abdul Hamid in the Tuhfa Saniyah. He drops some really good definitions, but in passing, and you need to keep them. So two definitions here of a sifa. One, a sifa بمعنى الصفة هي المعنى القائم بالشيء. And the sifa of the wajib al-wujud would be المعنى الواجب القائم بالشيء. And another definition of sifa is ما يحكم به على الشيء. Right? And so this is, and he's giving a general definition of sifa. You can consider your own attributes in this way, but you could say, what are the sifat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Right? هو it's either المعنى القائم بذات الله تعالى, right? or ما يحكم به على ذات الله تعالى, right? That which is affirmed, right? And what is حكم, of course? إثبات أمر لأمر, affirming one matter for another, أو نفيه عنه, or negating it, right? فدخل في هذا التعريف الوجود وصفات السلوب, يعني صفات السلبية, وصفات المعاني, والصفات المعنوية, ولو على القول بنفي الأحوال, even if we are negating the أحوال. So let's leave ahwal aside. So ahwal, according to those who affirm them, that they said, and this is just a matter of definition, and there's some secondary things, all right, that there's wujud, which is ما له تحقق في الخارج, and there's adam, so there's existence and there's non-existence. Between them there are ahwal. What they called ahwal, the other ulama said, no, this is min qism al-wujud, but the wujud is classified then into ما له تحقق في الخارج وأمر اعتباري, in a very simplified way. It is more sophisticated, more complex than that, but just to simplify it, right? Because does standing exist or not? that leads to many philosophical problems. Right? And the philosophers were lost on many of these things. They had all kinds of back and forth and got very complicated. The answer is, well, it's not non-existent and it's not existent, such that, then, okay, so there's a state between the two. That's al-qawl bil-ahwal. But that can muddy the water. So no, there's something either exists or doesn't. And if it does, it's either that one has external ما له تحقق في الخارج حمزة. So, and that doesn't have تحقق في الخارج, like your قعود. So we say قعود is an أمر اعتباري. But if you had to say قعود, does it exist or not? What would you say? Answer, I'll shoot. Two choices. Does قعود exist or not? It exists. But it exists بمعنى أنه أمر اعتباري. Why? Because the wujud has levels. And that's discussed elsewhere. Right? It says فَتَأَمَّل. This requires a little bit of thinking. Things like this require writing down. So hasil is that if you were to consider, if you were to define sifa with the first definition, al-ma'na al-qa'im bi-shay'. And some say al-ma'na al-qa'im bi-shay' az-za'id anhu. Right? Right? Because an attribute is not the thing itself, right? It's a meaning that you affirm for an entity. Right? Right? So an attribute is more than the entity itself. Right? So that's why you could say al-ma'na al-qa'im bi-shay' az-za'id anhu. In that sense, wujud is not an attribute. Right? Then why do you call it an attribute? Because we affirm it for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that's why the other definition, and this is, I believe it's Taftazani, many talked about this. Amongst them is Imam Sa'ad al-Din al-Taftazani. If you look in Hashiyat al-Sawi on the Kharida, in the same section, he breaks it down a little bit. But al-Muhim is the other definition of a sifa is ما يحكم به على الشيء. So what the sifa? So صفات هي ما يحكم به على ذات الله تعالى. So in that sense, wujud is a sifa. يحكم على ذات الله تعالى بالوجود. إثبات أمر لأمر. That's a hukum. Right? Affirming one thing for another. So يحكم بالوجود على ذات الله تعالى. So it's a sifa. يعني وصفنا ذات الله تعالى بالوجود. That's why it's called a sifa nafsiyya. It's a personal attribute. Right? And here, if you want to get the quote, Imam al-Bajuri, وَلَا يُخْبِرُكَ مِثْلُ خَبِيرٌ. Right? No one tells you about something like one who has deep experience. And it's a very useful, and it's something good to keep in mind, because a lot of people, because there's a concern to revive ilm al-kalam, so a lot of people are getting lost in details that don't bear a lot of fruit. Right? Imam Bajuri cautions that these investigations on wujud, and there's lengthy investigation, there's not a lot of fruit beyond them. Hasil of wujud is to affirm that is the hukum that Dhatullah, wujud is to affirm that Allah is, full stop. قُلْ هُوَ. Right? That's it. Right? That's it. That's all that's what it affirms, that he is. Right? Which is why the i'rab of Surah Al-Ikhlas is so fascinating, and which is why great philosophers have paid a lot of attention to Surah Al-Ikhlas, amongst them Ibn Sina, also Mullah al-Fanari or Fannari, and others, Ad-Duwani. They're particularly intrigued by Surah Al-Ikhlas, but stay out of that. Right? Which is like saying, don't think of an elephant. Right? So that's, then he says وقولنا أي الذاتي الوجود أي الذاتي معناه أنه. Now this expression here is a bit of a dangling expression. So he says أي أنه وجد لذاته لا مدخل لغيره فيه. يعني it means that his existence is intrinsic. In Arabic, this expression يعني أنه وجد لذاته أنه موجود لذاته. Right? أنه وجد لذاته أنه he is وجد لذاته أنه موجود لذاته وجودا واجبا. Right? 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 That he exists intrinsically. There is no role of any other in his existence. فوجوده واجب لذاته. You could actually, if you take notes, you just say أي ذاتي. I just highlight this part. فوجود أي وجوده واجب لذاته. لا يقبل الانتفاء. It does not accept negation. أزلا ولا أبدا. You know, neither in past nor in future. وقولنا الذات لذاته, and are saying intrinsically احترازا عن تعلق علم الله تعالى بوجود ولد لشخص مثلا. This excludes what's called الوجود العرضي. Right? So what it excludes is الوجود العرضي. So there's intrinsic existence, الوجود الذاتي, and there's الوجود or الوجوب الذاتي, that which is intrinsically necessary, it is الوجوب العرضي. Right? الوجوب العرضي, the contingently necessary, and they say الوجود الوجوب with a ba العرضي is ما تعلقت إرادة الله تعالى بوجوده. Right? فكان وجوده أثناء وجوده واجبا عرضيا. So the contingently necessary is that which Allah's will related to its existence. So while it exists, its existence there is contingently necessary. So in itself, the existence of this cup is what? The existence of this cup is in itself لذاته merely possible. Right? But let's say I threw it and it ceased existing. Right? So but then let's say it came into existence. Right? When it comes into existence, right now, what is its existence? Wajib aradi. Right? Why? It's in itself possible. It could have existed, could have not existed. But while it exists, right? When Allah's will related to it's being its existence being specified, and what Allah's will specifies, His power actualizes. During that time, its existence is واجب عرضيا لتعلق إرادة الله تعالى بتخصيصه. Or you can say so he says, for example, if Allah's knowledge relates to the existence of a child for a person, فوجود الولد واجب, so the existence of that child is necessary. لكن ليس لذاته, but not intrinsically. بل لتعلق علم الله به, but rather because Allah's knowledge relates to its existence. Right? And then he gives a proof for existence, right? Right? And this should be diagrammed, please. Right? In a thoughtful manner. I'd like to see it in handwriting. Just break it down. Right? So he says, وَالدَّلِيلُ عَلَى كَوْنِهِ وَاجِبَ الْوُجُودِ. Right? And there are different ways that the ulama discussed right? One, right, of how do we affirm wajib al-wujud? Sajiqli Zada in Nashr al-Tawali' mentions that there are many ways that the theologians discuss the existence of, the necessary existent. He said the most significant of these are two. One way that the theologians liked is Huduth al-Jawhar, right? The originatedness of essences. Right? And they said this is the tariqah, this is the way of Ibrahim al-Khalil, alayhi salam. Right? Right? Because he فَلَمَّا جَنَّ عَلَيْهِ اللَّيْلِ, right? رأى كوكبا قال هذا ربي فلما أفل, right? قال لا أحب الآفلين. Right? So each of these things that are the fact that all essence, the world is just jawahir and a'rad are just essences and their attributes, and all essences and all attributes are all originated. Therefore, the world is originated. Right? And anything originated requires an originator. Right? Okay? So he, right? And this has multiple ways through the originatedness. Which is why some people wonder why they do it, but the books of theology, if you look in Sharh al-Maqasid, for example, of al-Taftazani, there's over a volume describing in every way possible creation. Because whatever you describe, it doesn't go beyond being jawahir and a'rad, essences, things, and their qualities. And all of them are characterized by huduth. Right? لكن به قام دليل العدم. Right? He's pointed to that already in the text. And that's what Imam al-Dardir talked about, right? لأنه قام به التغير. Right? Because in all of this, there is the reality of change. إِنَّ فِي خَلْقِ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ وَاخْتِلَافِ اللَّيْلِ وَالنَّهَارِ. That has the two principal ways of arguing for the existence of God. Truly, in the createdness of the heavens and the earth, khalq, or in the creating, right? And there's levels of realization. Khalq points to levels of consciousness of that. Right? Because it's easier to see the athar, right? So there's 3 levels of consciousness, right? To see khalq بمعنى هذا المخلوق, the created, or the creating, right? And there's other things one could understand from that. واختلاف الليل والنهار, and the change of night and day, okay? Or the change that takes place in the layl wa nahar, in the context of time. Just all the change that take place in the world. The world, لآيات are numerous signs, right? These are the proofs of existence, right? 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 And there's other more philosophical ways, right, of discussing existence, of affirming the necessary existence, right? But we leave that aside, right? The main proof is from this point from Sajjid Zada, that this takes it back to what? You can connect this to what we took before, which is فانظر إلى نفسك ثم انتقلي للعالم العلوي ثم السفلي تجد به صنعا بديع الحكم لكن به قام دليل العدم, right? So what is the proof of Allah being the necessary existent? Because this world needs an originator, right? So you can take it back to لكن به قام دليل العدم, because in it lies the proof it's non-existent. But Imam al-Sawi tells us وَالدَّلِيلُ عَلَى كَوْنِهِ وَاجِبَ الْوُجُودِ, the proof that Allah is the necessary existence, أن تقول الله مفتقر إليه العالم. Allah, Allah Most High is the one in whose need all of existence is, right? Right? Why? He'll explain. وَكُلُّ مَا افْتَقَرَ إِلَيْهِ الْعَالَمُ فَهُوَ وَاجِبُ الْوُجُودِ. And all that this world is in need of must be a necessary existence. Okay? So here he subsumes, of course, the previous argument. Allah مفتقر إليه العالم لماذا? Why? لأن العالم, they say, من عرشه إلى فرشه قام به دليل العدم. فلكن نشهد وجوده, but we behold that it does exist. It did not originate itself. It cannot, because that would lead to dawr. أم خلقوا من غير شيء, were they created from nothing? Okay. أم هم الخالقون, or are they the ones who created, which will also be absurd. So it needs something to create it that could lead to either, and he'll explain that, right? And that originator needs to be necessary existent, otherwise it would lead to تسلسل, to infinite regress. لأنه لو كان من افتقر إليه العالم, if the one that the world, العالم is الوجود الممكن, right? الموجود, right? Al-alam is kullu mawjood siwa Allahi ta'ala, right? The world is all existent things besides Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? Is that those possible existence that are inexistent. Right? لأنه لو كان جائز الوجود, because the creator of the world, if it were merely possible to existence, لكان حادثا, it would itself be originated. ولو كان حادثا, and if it were originated, لافتقر إلى محدث, it would be in need of an originator. ولو افتقر المحدث ولو افتقر إلى محدث لافتقر محدثه إلى محدث. And if that originator needed an originator, right, then that other originator would also need an originator. فيلزم إما الدور, it would entail either circularity, which is so absurd that it doesn't need explanation, أو إلى التسلسل, or to infinite regress. وما أدى إلى الدور باطل, because that which results in دور, in circularity, A created B, B created C, C created A. لأنه يلزم عليه تقدم الشيء على نفسه, because it entails that the existence of a thing be preceded by itself. وتأخره عنها, that a thing be preceded by itself and to come after itself. وهو تناقض, and that's absurd. فهو محال, so this is absurd. وكذا ما أدى إلى التسلسل, and likewise that would lead to infinite regress. لأنه يلزم عليه وجود حوادث لا أول لها, because this entails the existence of originated things that have no beginning. وهو باطل للتناقض, and this is absurd due to the absurdity that it entails from a number of angles, right? لأن مقتضى كونها حوادث أن تكون لها أول, because what is entailed by them being originated is that they have a beginning, right? And this is a very abridged line of reasoning for it. And there's two things, and we can share both, inshallah. Doctor, one is, there's a nice contemporary discussion on this. It's a bit heavy, but it's worth listening to, by Shaykh Hamza Karam Ali on his Why Islam is True series that we have on YouTube. And it's worth taking notes on that. It's in English, it's clear. It's a bit heavy. The other, it's explained very nicely by Dr. Muhammad Sa'id Ramadan al-Buti in his work Kubra al-Yaqiniyat al-Kawniyya. Who breaks it down very nicely. We could share a PDF of the book, and it has very nice indexes as well. It's one of the undoubtedly great books of the 20th century. Rahmatullahi ta'ala. فبطل افتقار محدثه إلى محدث. So therefore, the originator of the world could not have an originator in itself. And there's a whole number of supplementary ways one can understand that too, because what are the qualities of a creator? What are the qualities of a creator? An originated thing necessarily does not possess its own existence. It has neither hawl nor quwwah intrinsically. Right? So it's not actually the creator. So the creator, these are So what you're affirming by saying that this was created by this, was created by this, is you're just affirming observed causality. Right? The creator is the one who does have will and power and can take something from non-existence into existence. Right? فبطل افتقار محدثه إلى محدث, and that's why its originator could not require an originator. ويلزم عليه بطلان افتقاره إلى محدث, and this would entail that the originator could not themselves require an originator. Right? It goes back to what are the qualities of a what do we mean by muhdith? Right? Is one who can take something from non-existence into existence. That's the meaning of khalq, al-ijad min al-adam. Right? By affirming some semblance of infinite regress, all you're observing is a chain of observed causality. But none of that affirms المحدث هو المخرج من العدم الأصلي إلى الوجود الحادث. The originator is the one who takes something from its original state of non-being into the contingent state of being. That's why this section you do well to diagram each of these parts. It takes, if one is honest with oneself, it takes time to reflect through on this, right? And also you have to be careful what to read, because it can take you in circles, right? If someone does want to read on it, one of the late works, and we could probably find it online. I don't know if there's a modern edition online. It's called كفاية العوام, and it's got and Imam Bajuri has a hashia on it. This is what's it called? Yeah. Hashiyat al-Bajuri. Yeah, it's Hashiyat al-Bajuri on Kifayat al-Awam. It discusses this section very, very, very nicely. And it's I don't know if you can find تحقيق المقام أو تحقيق المرام, تحقيق المقام على كفاية العوام of him. There's a modern edition of it. We have it at home, by the way. And so that has a nice, clear discussion. And of course, وَلَزِمَ مِنْهُ بُطْلَانُ كَوْنِهِ حَادِثًا. Therefore, it is absurd to affirm that the creator of the world could be originated. وَلَزِمَ مِنْهُ بُطْلَانُ جَوَازِهِ. And that therefore it would be absurd to affirm that the creator of the world would be merely possible. يعني بطلان جواز وجوده. فثبت وجوب وجوده. Therefore, the creator of the world could only be a necessary existent. إذ لا واسطة لأنه لا واسطة بينهما, because there's no intermediate state between existence and non-existence, right? This is a conceptual argument. It's very powerful. This is why people like Shaykh Hamza, Yusuf, and others argue that people need to study metaphysics and cosmology and so on, because having a conceptual framework helps people to be able to think, it gives them the intellectual tools to think about reality. Right? The challenge is most people don't think like that anymore. Right? So some of this is intellectually very sound. It is, but the sad thing is people don't think like that, right? So you need to know, but you need to have different tools for different contexts. But you also have to be able to think using these tools and to know which tool to apply in which situation. Because not everybody, and sometimes you can use one of these tools, but clothe it in examples, for example, right? And that's one of the things that Imam al-Bajuri does, for example. Okay. So that's just a little bit about. Then he has a few tanbihat, right? So here, what do we need to do? We need to break down this argument a little bit, right? That the world needs a creator. Why? Because of what we've taken before. So you sort of link it back to that. That creator has to be necessarily existent, because if he weren't necessarily existent, it would lead to infinite regress. Infinite regress is absurd, right? Why is it absurd? That's something that within 2 weeks, I need you to be able to give a 30-second answer to that, right? That imagine if you're shopping for falafel al-hummus and someone came, they left their car running and said, "Ahlan wa sahlan, Abu Abdo." يعني مسألة التسلسل إيش هي؟ And the car is running, so he has 30 seconds. Yeah, you should be able to, you understand something if you explain it like that, right? But soundly, right? Then Imam Sawi goes on one of his spiritual digressions, right? Tanbih. And the reason why he goes into these spiritual digressions is that two reasons. One, common people say things, that sometimes are problematic, sometimes are sound, but they shouldn't say them. Right? Sometimes they're just wrong. Right? So he says, that's one side. Right? The other is that the people of the spiritual path say things like this, and to be able to benefit from the spiritual path and its teachings, one needs to understand, what are these people talking about? Right? شاع قال الإمام الصاوي رحمه الله شاع على ألسنة العوام الله موجود في كل الوجود. The common person, it's widespread in common parlance in his time that people say, that the common person says, Allah exists in all existent things. وهو كلام صحيح في نفسه. This is in itself sound. لأن مفاده وحدة الوجود. Because what is understood from it is the oneness of existence. لكنه غير لائق منهم. But it is unbefitting for them to say something like that. لإيهام الحلول. Because it gives the sense of indwelling. That Allah indwells in His creation. And He gives a ta'wil. Now, the issue of wahdatul wujud, right, causes hearts to flutter, people to get emotional and very upset. There is a philosophical affirmation of wahdatul wujud, وحدة الوجود بالمعنى الفلسفي عند بعض الفلاسفة or some philosophers, where there is only one existent, so created things do not exist, right? And that would, or that there is indwelling, right? Right? There is indwelling. We make no affirmation of existent things, and in that sense, there is no even moral responsibility, right? There's no real moral responsibility, because if you don't really exist, then you don't really have choice. If you don't really exist or have choice, then what's what, right? Of course, it's very convenient, because if you're smart and sophisticated and you think, well, none of this really exists, then I don't either. I don't have choice. I don't exist and I don't have choice. Then, like, what's all this kalam about responsibility, right? So it's got many harmful implications. The other meaning of this term is simply to affirm that which is affirmed by Abu Madian in the poem that's coming up, right? But simply that Allahu wajibul wujud, right? Right? And لا واجب وجود سوى Allah. There's none who is necessary, existent, except Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah's wujud is wajib. Okay? Does anything else have? Right? That's why, what does Shaykh Abdul Ghani say in one of his poems? He says, إن وحدة الوجود لدينا وحدة الحق فافهم ما نقول. Right? 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 So that's what they mean. يعني وحدة الوجود الواجب. Right? That there's only one necessary existent. And why did they talk about this? ليش تشوش على الناس? Said no. Because they found that the most powerful way of wiping away the delusion of worldly things is by making people focus on the reality of the oneness of the existence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, then what gets sensitive, and this is why Imam al-Sawi, out of his concern, though a theologian, he's also a spiritual guide, is that he wants to dispel these misunderstandings so that people are able to benefit from the spiritual teachings of the spiritual masters. Now, the scholars of Islamic spirituality use this terminology purposefully. And this is what's called istilahu tasleek. Right? So, if someone is repentant, right? Someone wants to repent, they come to you. You say, don't worry about it. You don't really need to repent. Like, don't get worried. It's fine. Allah is merciful. He forgives everything. And إن الحسنات يذهبن السيئات. So someone wanted to repent. If you tell them that, what are they going to do? Mumtaz. I'll go back and do a little more and just do some hasanat in Ramadan. Right? But if someone wants to reach closeness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? Then they focus them on this meeting على وجه المبالغة. Why? To حتى يتركوا أوهام السوى. That's the point. So they leave the delusion of the reality of originated things, right? This is outside the scope of just علم التوحيد, just as علم الدليل والبرهان, right? But it is significant. So he says, وتأويله, the interpretation of this word is أنه مع كل موجود, that Allah is with every existent thing. أي لا يغيب عن موجود أصلا. He is not absent from anything that exists. ومعيته معه معناها تصرفه فيه وتدبيره له. معية معنوية لا يعلمها إلا هو. And Allah's withness with created things means Allah's complete disposal over it, and His complete tadbir, His complete taking care of it, with a withness that is ma'nawiyya, that is a meaning whose reality is only known by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? This goes back to the qayyumiyya of Allah. Allah as being the all-sustaining. This goes back to His ijad and imdad. Right? His originating and His sustaining all things at every moment, in every way. كما أن ذاته تعالى لا يعلمها إلا هو. Just as the entity of Allah in its reality is only known by Him. لا يخفى عليه شيء. Nothing is hidden from Him. في الأرض ولا في السماء. On earth nor in the sky. ومن كلام سيدي ابن وفا رضي الله تعالى عنه, right? علي ibn Muhammad ibn Wafa, right? Who died in the year 750, who died in the year 800 and something, 807 Hijri. أن من أعظم إشارات وحدة الوجود قوله تعالى, from the greatest of the signs of the reality of oneness of being is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's words, سنريهم آياتنا في الآفاق وفي أنفسهم. We shall show them our signs in the horizons and within themselves, حتى يتبين لهم أنه الحق, until it is clear to them that it is He who is the real. Right? He is the real, that all these other things don't have intrinsic reality. Their reality is contingent, dependent, originated. Right? Ibn Ata'illah says, الأكوان ثابتة بإثباته ممحوة بأحدية ذاته. Creation is affirmed only through His having affirmed it. ممحوة, completely effaced before the absolute oneness of His entity. أو لم يكفي بربك أنه على كل شيء شهيد. It is not enough with respect to your Lord that He is over all things witness. إنهم في مرية من لقاء ربهم. Indeed, they are confused and deluded regarding the meeting of their Lord. ألا إنه بكل شيء محيط. Truly, He is indeed encompassing of all things, إيجادا وإمدادا, right? In originating and sustaining. ومن ألطف إشاراتها, and of the subtlest of indications of this, of this reality, كما قال شيخنا الأمير في حاشيته, as our Shaykh الأمير الكبير in his حاشية إتحاف المريد on the sharh on of عبد السلام اللقاني on جوهرة التوحيد, قول الغوث أبي مدين, the words of Abu Madian التلمساني, who said, and this is in the Diwan of Abu Madian, and there's a beautiful takhmis of this by Shaykh Abdul Rahman al-Shaghuri, الله قل وذر الوجود وما حوى إن كنت مرتادا بلوغ كمالي. Say Allah and leave aside existence and all it contains if you seek to attain perfection. وذر الوجود, and leave aside contingent existence. الوجود الممكن, الموهوم, right? This illusory existence and all it contains. Because all of it is merely possible. All of it on its own is illusory. If you seek to attain perfection, what is perfection? Perfection is to behold Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. فالكل دون الله إن حققته عدم على التفصيل والإجمال. For all things besides Allah, if you ascertain their reality, حققته أي أدركت حقيقته في نفسه. If you understand its reality in of itself, it's عدم. يعني الوجود الممكن مادته العدم. Right? The possible existent things, their essence is nothingness. Right? And this is that's what when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, كُلُّ مَنْ عَلَيْهَا فَانٍ, all that is upon it is perishing. Right? It's not just it will perish one day. Right? Fan is a masdar حقيقة في الحال. It's perishing now. What is its فنائية ذاتية? Its essential perishingness? That it doesn't possess. لا أملك لنفسي نفعا ولا ضرا ولا حياة ولا نشورا. It doesn't possess anything for itself from itself. Right? كلا نمد, all we sustain. هؤلاء وهؤلاء من عطاء ربك. So the wujud, the existence of originated things, some of the ulama refer to it as wujud ata'i. There's wujud dhati and there's wujud ata'i. It's granted existence. Right? وَلَوْلَا الْإِمْدَادِ, right? Were it not for that sustaining, لَتَلَاشَ الْمَوْجُود. The existing things would just come to nothing. عدم على التفصيل, in detail or in summary. وَعْلَمْ بِأَنَّكَ وَالْعَوَالِمَ كُلَّهَا, and know that you and all the worlds, لَوْلَاهُ فِي مَحْوٍ وَفِي اضْمِحْلَالِ, were not for him, would be effaced and perishing. مَنْ لَا وُجُودَ لِذَاتِهِ مِنْ ذَاتِهِ, anything that has no existence for itself, from itself. فَوُجُودُهُ, then its existence, لَوْلَاهُ, were it not for Allah, عَيْنُ مُحَالِ, لَا حَوْلَ وَلَا قُوَّةَ إِلَّا بِاللَّهِ. Right? وَالْعَارِفُونَ فَنَوْا وَلَمَّا يَشْهَدُوا. And what I remember, فَنَوْا وَلَمَّا يَشْهَدُوا. Yeah. But Allahu A'lam, you can see it in his diwan. فَنَوْا وَلَمَّا يَشْهَدُوا. أو فَنَوْا بِهِ لَمْ يَشْهَدُوا. And those who know Allah were extinguished, beholding not شيئا سوى المتكبر المتعالي, and did not behold a shuhudan awwaliyan. What is the first reality in your consciousness? سوى المتكبر المتعالي, except the most exalted and most high. ورأوا سواه على الحقيقة هالكا, and saw all besides him in reality perishing. في الحال والماضي والاستقبال, in present, past and future. Right? In present, past and future. Okay? Right? As another poet said, إياك تشهد غيره ودع العنا لا أنت في هذا الوجود ولا أنا إن الوجود هو الحقيق الذي به نبدو وبه نعود إلى الفنا. Right? So beware of beholding other than him and leave aside all toil. There is no you in true existence, nor me. إن الوجود الحقيقي, true existence, هو الذي نبدو به, The true existence is the one by whom we are manifested. وَبِهِ نَعُودُ إِلَى الْفَنَى. And by him we return to nothingness. Okay? And they sang a lot towards that to shift our consciousness. That's the right, because the problem, okay, that people have is that they imagine everything around them to be real. And they imagine that Allah is somehow distant, and we'll get to it. Whereas the reality is the exact opposite, right? The cup is real. You say, well, it's created, Allah created it, right? But the reality is, Allah created the cup. It's not the cup was created by Allah, right? That's how, right? The نحو the جملة تصور العوام is their جمل is مبنية على المجهول, right? Right? They affirm things. The cup was created, right? And then you say, oh, there's a creator, right? Like whereas what is the reality? Allah is the creator, is creating the cup, okay? Or he created the cup and is sustaining the cup, okay? Because how is the cup come into existence? بإيجاد الله. Then how does it remain in existence? بإمداد الله. نعمتان لا ينفك عنهما موجود ولا بد لكل موجود منهما. There are two blessings that everything in existence requires and no existent thing can do without. نعمة الإيجاد ونعمة الإمداد. The blessing of origination and the blessing of being sustained. Right? So that's what they focused on, right? But how does one attain this reality? It requires remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? Shaykh Ahmed al-Alawi al-Mustaghani says, what does he say? عليك يا مريد, what is it? How does it begin? أيا مريد الله نعيد لك قول صغاه إذا تفهم قولي به تصل لله. O seeker of Allah, we'll repeat some words, so listen up. If you understand my words, says Shaykh Ahmed al-Alawi, by them you will reach Allah. عليك يا مريد بخمرة التوحيد وإن تبغي المزيد فالغير عنك انساه. Right? It is upon you, O seeker of God, to drink, to partake of the wine of divine oneness. What is the wine of divine oneness? لا إله إلا الله. وإن تبغي المزيد. And if you seek, increase. Then other, forget. Right? And then he continues describing what that entails. Right? نسأل الله سبحانه وتعالى العافية. So he touches upon this because of its centrality in the spiritual way of. And why did they do this? One is, this is central to the reality of what the Prophet ﷺ has come with. Right? Right? But they found that this, focusing on this methodologically, works. Because the whole Quran is calling us to realize إنما الحياة الدنيا لعب ولهو وزينة وتفاخر. All this. Right? The whole Quran is telling us وَلَلْآخِرَةُ خَيْرٌ لَكَ مِنَ الْأُولَى. The Quran is telling us about that what is ما عندكم ينفد وما عند الله باق. Right? Things only have a reality, a sustained reality by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But how do you shift consciousness? They found this works. And this is the ta'keed of the Prophet ﷺ. لا يزال لسانك رطبا من ذكر الله. Okay? Keep your tongue moist with the remembrance of Allah. أفضل ما جئت به أنا والنبيون من قبلي لا إله إلا الله. The best of what I and the prophets came with is لا إله. There's لا إله لا مستغنية عما سواه مفتقر إليه ما عداه إلا الله. There's none absolutely free of need of any other, whom all are in absolute need of except Allah. So that's the point of focus. Right? And there's different methods that were adopted for it. Then he goes into الصفات السلبية خمس. We'll stop here. There's a lot to digest here. We should also share the poem of Shaykh Abdul Rahman al-Shaghuri, right? From his diwan. You can share the whole diwan, the PDF. Mention what pages the poem's on. The takhmis. So we'll pause, and then we'll read a little bit from إيضاح المبهم in logic, inshallah, in 5 minutes. الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح قد قامت الصلاة قد قامت الصلاة الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله الله أكبر. wasallam. We've reached line number 9 of the Matn of the Sulam, Al-Munawwaraq, with its commentary, Idah al-Mubham. And after the opening supplication, right, which he included many of the meanings of the purpose of studying the subject, right, in the way he praised Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and sent blessings on the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and his followers. He says here, وَبَعْد. So this is Imam al-Akhdari in Sulam al-Munawwaraq says, in lines 9 to 11, وَبَعْدُ فَالْمَنْطِقُ لِلْجَنَانِ نِسْبَتُهُ كَالنَّحْوِ لِلِّسَانِ. So he says to proceed. Logic with respect to minds is, its relationship is like that of grammar for the tongue, right? فَيَعْصِمُ الْأَفْكَارَ عَنْ غَيِّ الْخَطَى وَعَنْ دَقِيقِ الْفَهْمِ يَكْشِفُ الْغِطَى. So it protects thinking from the waywardness of error and from subtle understanding lifts covering. فَهَاكَ مِنْ أُصُولِهِ قَوَاعِدَ تَجْمَعُ مِنْ فُنُونِهِ فَوَائِدَ. So here are of its foundational principles, from its principles, certain foundational principles that gather from the investigations of logic what is most beneficial, fawaid, right? So this, says the author, the commentator Imam al-Damanhuri rahimahullah ta'ala says, أقول لفظة بعد, right? When we say بعد تكون ظرف زمان كما في قولك جاء زيد بعد عمرو. When we say بعد, after, it could be a ظرف مكان, a ظرف زمان. It can indicate time, one thing after another in time. Zayd came after Amr. وظرف مكان, or a ظرف with after, being referential to place. كما في قولك دار زيد بعد دار عمرو. Amr's house is after, or Zayd's house is after Amr's house. ويصح استعماله هنا في المعنيين. And here وبعد could have both meanings. باعتبارين, with two separate considerations. باعتبار أن زمن النطق بما بعدها بعد زمان النطق بما قبلها. It can be referring to time because وبعد, so after this, after having said what I have said, I will say this, right? أو باعتبار أن مكانه في الرقم بعده, or it can be after with respect to place. After having covered this, we come to this, so to speak. وهي هنا وبعد دالة على الانتقال من كلام إلى آخر. And here وبعد indicates shifting from one type of speech to another. Right? Right? فلا يؤتى بها في أول الكلام. So one does not begin one speech with it. You don't say وبعد, بعد إيش. Okay? Normally it's done that you make your opening dua and you say وبعد. And this is called فصل الخطاب. Right? 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 And now, is this the فصل الخطاب that is being referred to in the Quran? There's extensive discussion about that. They also discuss, its origin is to say أما بعد, and they abridged it to وبعد. And some said that the first said was Yaqub or Ayub or Adam or Qus, or Suhban, or Ka'b, or Ya'rub, right? And a scholar has written treatises on Amma Ba'd, amongst them the great marvel of a scholar of the 20th century, Maulana Ruhani al-Bazi of Lahore, who has an extensive risala on Amma Ba'd, like 150, 200 pages on Amma Ba'd. There's a lot to be said about Amma Ba'd, and the i'rab of it, and what it indicates, and how is it suitable and unsuitable to use, etc. So, وَبَعْد. And it's a sunnah. One intends a sunnah. This is from the sunnahs of speech. That one have a clear opening. It says, أَمَّا بَعْد or وَبَعْد. Right? He says, وَالْمَنْطِق مصدر ميمي يطلق بالاشتراك على النطق بمعنى اللفظ وعلى الإدراك. Right? So, mantiq is a masdar, is a verbal noun that begins with a meme. Right? Right? And this meme is extra. Right? So, the masdar mimi is a masdar that begins with a meme that is extra. That's basically what it is. Right? Because it doesn't indicate mufa'ala. Right? So maqtal means qatl. Right? And this is also called the ism masdar. Right? Mantiq. Right? Mantiq is used, has two shared usages. It can either refer to nutq, to a word. Mantiq is what you utter. So it can be speech. Right? Or idrak, or understanding. Right? Idrak is coming to understand something. وَالْمُرَادُ بِهِ هُنَا. Right? And this, the second meaning is the basis of the formal use of mantiq as a name for the science of logic. It's the science of sound understanding. Mantiq. Right? وَالْمُرَادُ بِهِ هُنَا, and what's meant contextually, الْفَنُّ الْمُؤَلَّفُ فِيهِ هَذَا الْكِتَابِ, is the science. Mantiq refers to the science for which this book is authored. سُمِّيَ بِهَذَا الْإِسْمِ, the science of mantiq has been given this name لأنه أولا يقوي الإدراك, because it sharpens thinking, because it gives you principles of thinking. ويعصمه عن الخطأ, and secondly it protects thinking from errors. Right? So it strengthens thinking, strengthens sound thinking, because say, well, I know how to think. Yeah, but can you construct sophisticated arguments? What do you mean by a sophisticated argument? You don't even know what a sophisticated argument is. So this tells you, okay, can you define things well? I'll try. No, but do you know how to define something well? Can you construct a solid argument? The two parts of mantiq. The first part, it strengthens يعني قوة الإدراك, right? And the second is وَيَعْصِمُهُ عَنِ الْخَطَأِ, and it protects it from error in thinking, whether in defining something or in making an argument. And there's a third aspect which is observational, which is to identify unsound thinking or reasoning. Right? وَتَمْيِيزُ صحيح الإدراك عن سقيمه. Right? وصوابه عن خطئه. Right? It's also to identify strong reasoning from weak reasoning, and sound reasoning from unsound reasoning. فهو قانون تعصم مراعاته الذهن عن الخطأ في فكره. So it is principles that protect, that whose upholding protects the mind from errors in thinking. Right? Right? And they define it in two ways. Some said logic is principles, or the other said it's al-ilmu biqawanin. It is knowledge of principles. Ila akhirih. It's either logic is the principles themselves, or it's the knowledge of these principles. And the distinction is subtle. Right? Protect the mind from errors in thinking. So he says, فَمَنْ رَعَى قَوَاعِدَ هَذَا الْفَنِّ لَا يَتَطَرَّقُ إِلَيْهِ الْخَطَأ فِي فِكْرِهِ. So whoever upholds the principles of this subject, then their thinking would not be susceptible to errors when they uphold these principles. كما أن من راعى قواعد النحو لا يتطرق إليه الخطأ في المقال. Just as the one who upholds the principles of nahu, of grammar, then their words would not be susceptible to errors. But this is why they call it ulumul ala. These are instrumental sciences. But the sign that your relationship to the instrumental sciences is fruitful is husulu thamara, is the fruit of that is found. But also, and this is especially an admonition to the Arabs, with respect to grammar, most Arabs don't read grammatically. Even actually, many of the ulama. Sadly. You can tell within 60 to 180 seconds who's reading grammatically and who's not. Right? وإلى هذا المعنى أشار بقوله, and this is what is indicated when he says فالمنطق للجنان نسبته كالنحو للسان, that the relationship of logic with respect to the heart, the mind, is like the relationship of grammar to the tongue. فيعصم الأفكار, so it protects thinking, أي يحفظها, it protects it, عن غي الخطأ, from the waywardness of error. والجنان يطلق على القلب, and janan is used for the heart. والمراد به القوة الفكرية, right? And it's the capacity of thinking, right? The capacity of thinking, right? And if you have there's a useful compiled hashia on it. I don't want you to get lost in it. What's it called? Tanjiyatul Mubham? What's the title? Natijatul Muhtam, Sharh Idah. It's by this very diligent Indonesian scholar. But he has a very nice quote from Imam al-Ghazali, from Mi'yar al-Ilm. I'll share it in the class group. And you can post it wherever it needs to be posted, inshallah. Right? He has a very nice quote from Imam al-Ghazali. He said, قال الإمام حجة الإسلام. Can we switch on the monitors? Is it here? So he says, rahimahullah, in Mi'yar al-Ulum. Imam al-Ghazali has two principal independent works on logic. One's called Mi'yar al-Ulum, the criteria for knowledge, for all knowledge, right? And the other is Mahakku Nazar, the test of reasoning. Right? Is it on the monitor? You don't have to do anything over there. Okay. Okay, now. Can you see? Okay. So Imam al-Ghazali says, are you able to connect that over there? He says in Mi'yar al-Ulum, لما كثر في المعقولات مزلة الأقدام. When people became more and more susceptible to slipping in rational matters, ومثارات الضلال, and things that cause people to go astray through reasoning. ولم تنفك مرآة العقل عما يكدرها من تخليطات الأوهام وتلبيسات الخيال. And the mirror of the intellect is not bereft of that which would occlude it of the mix-ups of awham, of delusions, and the encumberings of imaginations. رتبنا هذا الكتاب. We have arranged this book معيارا للنظر, as a criteria for sound thinking, والاعتبار, and sound consideration, وميزانا للبحث والافتكار, and as a measure, right, or a scale for sound investigation and consideration. وثقيلا للذهن, and to polish the mirror of the mind, right? ومشحذا لقوة الفكر والعقل, and to strengthen, to charge the strength of reasoning and intellect. فيكون بالنسبة إلى أدلة العقول كالعروض بالنسبة إلى الشعر. So it is with respect to the proofs of reason like the meters of poetry for poetry. Try to write poetry but you don't know the meters, you're going to make up whatever. والنحو بالإضافة إلى الإعراب, or like grammar is with respect to i'rab, of sound speech. You don't know how to, you know what the rules are? Especially when it gets complicated, you're going to mess up. إذ لا يعرف منزحف الشعر عن موزونه إلا إذ لا يعرف منزحف الشعر عن موزونه إلا بميزان العروض. Because you don't know what is unsound poetry from sound poetry except by knowing the meters of poetry. ولا يميز صواب الإعراب عن خطئه إلا بمحك النحو. And one cannot distinguish between sound and unsound grammatical expression except through knowledge of grammar. So this is why logic is important, right? And he says وإضافة غي إلى الخطأ من إضافة العام إلى الخاص. So ascription of misguided to error is from ascription of the general to the specific. إذ الغي, because misguidance is to be, غي is إذ الغي الضلال. غي is ضلال, misguidance, and خطأ and error is one type of misguidance, because there's other types of misguidance, right? And there's a really nice note here in this commentary on what is dalal, and the author of this, it's a modern compilation really. He quotes the author of Al-Qamus Al-Muhit, Al-Fayruzabadi, He has a beautiful work on the Quran called Basairu Dhawi Tamyiz. Right? And he talks about, and he breaks down the meaning of dalal here, which we won't. Right? قوله وعن دقيق الفهم, and from subtle understanding بإضافة الصفة إلى الموصوف, from description of the descriptor to that which is described. Right? Because the origin would be al-fahm al-daqiq. So daqiq is the sifa, the mawsuf is al-fahm. One of the eloquent ways in Arabic, we want to emphasize the sifa, you put it before the mawsuf. This is al-fahm al-daqiq, al-fahm al-daqiq. Where is the emphasis? On al-fahm. And al-daqiq is a qualifier of it. It gets emphasized, but secondarily. But we say daqiq al-fahm. You put the emphasis on the quality, right? Highlights it more. والمصدر بمعنى اسم المفعول, and the masdar أي الفهم, because the masdar is used for either إيقاع الفعل أو الحاصل من الفعل, right? So فهم here is المفهوم, الحاصل من الفهم, right? Is فهم بمعنى the ism maf'ul, from subtle understanding, a subtle meanings that are understood. المفهوم الدقيق, the subtle things that are understood. والغطاء بكسر الغين, and غطاء is وكسر الغين, which in غطاء, and it's غطاء without a hamza, because of poetry, that's permitted. It's the asl is غطاء ما يغطى به الشيء, or الستر, right? Right? A cover. والمعنى أن من تمكن من هذا الفهم فن صار النظري من المعاني المستورة ضروريا مكشوفا واضحا له. That the one who becomes firm-footed in understanding and applying the science, the meanings requiring thought and that are hidden become intuitively obvious and apparent and clear for them. وهذا أمر مشاهد, and this is a matter that is clear and witnessed. لا يحتاج لبيان, does not require exposition. And a lot of lazy students of knowledge and a lot of sort of people who like theorizing on the side, because they say فاقد الشيء يعني لا يعطيه, because the one who doesn't have something can't give it, and they say المرء عدو ما جهل, a person is an enemy of what they're ignorant of. They don't study grammar, they don't study logic, one, they didn't get a chance, or there's been a weakening in some places of the rational sciences, or just lazy. They took a circuitous route, they winged it. So they say it's not important. Right? There's another exaggeration that this is just a means. للوسائل حكم الغايات, means take the ruling of endings. What are you doing with this? Right? And what we're doing with this is we want to have sound, sharp, deep reasoning so that we can understand the khitab of Allah and His Messenger soundly and clearly, appreciate the arguments that are right there clearly in the Quran, but we don't see it as an argument. Why? Because we don't know what an argument is, even if it comes announcing. Right? What did Ibrahim do with his people? Hajja ish? Yeah. They entered into muhajaja. They entered into logical, irrational argument. But we miss that. And a number of scholars, amongst them Shaykh Abdurrahman Habannaka, he talked about the arguments in the Quran, Also discusses it in his work in Mantiq called Dawabitul Ma'rifa, the criteria for understanding. Similarly, Sayyid Abul Hasan Ali Nadwi has on his how the prophets made their arguments, right? Underlying it is sound reasoning, right? هاك اسم فعل بمعنى خذ. هاك, here are, meaning take. قواعد معموله, principles. من أصوله, of its foundational principles. حال من قواعد. من تبعيضية. من أصوله, this min is partitive from some of its principles. أي خذ قواعد هي بعض أصوله. Take some principles that are some of its foundational principles. أي قواعده. القاعدة والأصل بمعنى واحد. Because قاعدة and أصل have one meaning. And a simple definition of أصل is الأصل ما يبنى عليه غيره. An أصل is that which other things are built upon. هو أمر كلي ينطبق على جميع جزئياته. It's a general matter that applies to all its particulars. كقول النحاة الفاعل مرفوع, like the grammarian saying the fa'il is in a state of رفع. وقول المناطق, and what the logicians say, الموجبة الكلية عكسها الموجبة الجزئية. Right? Or like the logician saying the following. We won't explain it here because this comes much later, right? الفنون الفروع, of its فنون أي أو العلوم, right? The details. فوائد جمع فائدة. فوائد is the plural of فائدة, وهي في الأصل ما استفيد من علم أو مال. فائدة فيد بمعنى الزيادة, right? But it's that which is benefited from of knowledge or wealth, right? Right? And الفيد بمعنى الاستحداث. Faid is something new that comes, right? Whether wealth or good, right? And here in the Natijatul Mubham, there's a nice two lines of poetry by Shihab al-Din al-Khafaji. And Shihab al-Din al-Khafaji is a great scholar. Amongst his many great works, radiallahu anhu, was a Hashia on Baydawi. Hashiyat al-Shihab, one of the four most famous of the Hawashi on the Tafsir al-Baydawi. Shihab al-Din al-Khafaji, al-Kunawi, Shaykh Zada, and there's many others. I'm not gonna. There's competition for the other. There's many, but Shihab al-Din al-Khafaji also wrote one of the two greatest commentaries on the Shifa of Qadi Iyad. There's a brief commentary on the Shifa of Qadi Iyad by Mullah Ali al-Qari, famous as Sharh al-Shifa, but I'm sure it has a name. And then there is the great commentary on the Shifa of Qadi Iyad, which is called Nasim al-Riyad في شرح Shifa al-Qadi Iyad by Shihab al-Din al-Khafaji. Right? Because the point of benefit, right? They say وقيل اسم فاعل من فأدته أي أصبت فؤاده. فائدة is from فأدته. This one of the meaning that it's something that touches the heart. That's a فائدة. وعليه قول الشهاب الخفاجي من الفؤاد اشتقت الفائدة والنفس يا صاحبها شاهدة. From the heart, fu'ad is a فائدة, a point of benefit taken. And the self, dear friend, يا صاحبي, it's مرخم, bears witness to this. لذا ترى أفئدة الناس قد مالت لمن في قربه فائدة. This is why you see the hearts of people do incline to those in whose closeness is benefit. And this is a fa'idah about fa'idah, but I'll post this in the forum too. The commentary has a lot of the hashiyah. Don't get lost in hawashi. They say من أتقن المتون نال الفنون ومن قرأ الحواشي فما حواشي. That whoever masters the core texts attains the sciences. And whoever just reads the hawashi, who reads the marginalia, does not attain a lot. Right? So this is now lines 9 to 11. He's now defined for us. What? What did he define for us? وَبَعْد, the importance of the science. Then lines 12 to 14, he tells us what he named it and why. سميته بالسلم المنورق يرقى به سماء علم المنطق. I called it السلم المنورق, right? The radiant ladder. By it, you rise to the sky of the knowledge of logic. وَاللَّهَ أَرْجُو أَنْ يَكُونَ خَالِصًا. And it is Allah in whom I hope that this be pure. لِوَجْهِهِ الْكَرِيمِ لَيْسَ قَالِصًا. Right? For His noble countenance, for Him alone, and not deficient. وَأَنْ يَكُونَ نَافِعًا لِلْمُبْتَدِي. And that it be of benefit to the beginner. بِهِ إِلَى الْمُطَوَّلَاتِ يَهْتَدِي. Through it, to the large text, the beginner be guided. Right? And there are numerous commentaries on the Sullam al-Munawwaraq. The most accessible of them is the one we're reading. There are a number of others. Some have been printed together. Amongst them, there's many hawashi on it. Arguably the most notable of these is the hashia of Imam al-Bajuri, Khatimat al-Muhaqqiqeen. There's many works on the Sullam itself. Of course, one must distinguish, this is a Sullam al-Munawwaraq, which is a brief poem, right, in the principles of logic. At the beginner level, some people begin with the Sullam, and that was certainly the way of the Mashayikh of Sham. Others prefer to begin with Isaghuji, Matn Isaghuji, which is based on, but adapted from the logic of Periphery, or however you pronounce his name, one of the Greek logicians. And that has many commentaries on it. In Sham, generally, they would study that. They would study Idah al-Mubham, then they would read Sharh al-Matla' of Shaykh al-Islam Zakir al-Ansari on Isaghuji. Then after that, people would often study Tahdhib al-Mantiq of Taftazani with the Sharh of al-Khabisi, or there's other shuruh on it. And then beyond that, one would go to the larger books if there's a need. And there's many great works. The Shamsiyya is one of the larger works, and that has a sharh of Qutbuddin al-Tahtani. Sayyid al-Sharif al-Jurjani went to study this text with the author, with the commentator, but before he got to the commentator, he'd read the commentary cover to cover 14 times. And he'd written 2 sets of his own notes on it before he went to study the book with the teacher. That's how Sayyid al-Sharif al-Jurjani. But one doesn't get lost in this. The important thing is, above all, that what do we want to get out of it? We want to have these clear thinking, clear thinking about how we define things and how we make our arguments. And to be able to see when people are not defining things properly and not arguing things properly. It's min ulum al-ala. And practically, as you learn, apply this. So when you describe something, describe it precisely. When you make an argument, think about how you're structuring it. Think before you say things. Some people have to think, okay, it's keep throwing things till something sticks. That's not argument, right? than being a garbage man. Right? So we will continue from here, from the commentator explaining out these lines بإذن الله تعالى. وصلى الله على سيدنا ونبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. Someone has a little bit of resolve, they would find benefit in doing this and also doing Shaykh Hamza Karam Ali on Seekers covers Isa Ghuji, and they complement each other quite well. But kullu khairin fi ittiba'i man salaf, all benefit. So Shaykh Adib covered Idah al-Mubham, and that's what his teachers used to do, and they found really benefit in that. And if someone wanted to do more than Idah al-Mubham, Shaykh Adib generally used to say, okay, let's do it again. So I wanted to do the next book. So it happened that there's another brother who wanted to cover Idah al-Mubham. He says, attend that one too. So we covered a second. Then there's these really annoying Algerians. And nothing about Algerians, but they're attitudinally divergent and adab divergent. Shaykh, they're like, ikbas ala tasjil, record it. And like, there's an adab, please, law samaht. Right? But Shaykh Adib would be really polite and humble with them. One of the most important lessons on Bahth al-Ashkal, they got to it. They didn't press record. They pressed play. So their blank cassette, just press. They reach the end, say, yeah, Shaykh. And they, the people who put the cassette in, they press play, not record. Says, ma sajjalt. You didn't record. Because sometimes they'd put it in, sometimes. Say, سامحوني جدا. Say, I apologize. نعيد الدرس. Let's repeat it. And he gave the whole dars again, exactly as he did the first time. And it's one of the sections that requires more explanation. And Shaykh Adib had a way of, the different ways you can structure an argument, he had a way, he'd construct it, right? With, because this is sound, because there's a shared middle. This is sound, because there's a shared middle. There's, basically you need to have a shared middle, right? There's other ways you can structure arguments as well, if you understand what they mean. I can't do this stuff for you. You can figure out the sign language yourself. So we'll continue from here. Right? But of course he points here, one of the wisdoms of the ulama liking Idah al-Mubham is that this beginning, he's laying out, connecting this to our religious commitment as believers, right? Then why are we approaching this? And here he closed, the lines that we'll be uncovering next week, and inshallah the lines after that, the importance of sincerity, that this is for Allah, right? And that it benefit the beginner. It's not just about that the beginner acquire this knowledge, but that they benefit from it. Right? And true benefit is ما يبقى في الآخرة. Right? And then also that this take them to the larger works. Right? So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for facilitation. Wa sallallahu ala sayyidina wa nabiyina Muhammad wa alihi wa sahbihi wa alhamdulillahi rabbil alamin. Yes?
There's a question from online. What's the difference between a'rad and sifat?
We'll take that next class. So a sifa, a arad, indicates that which is fleeting, right? So you can refer, generally they use sifa, they use arad with respect to the qualities of jawahir, of essences, right? And jawahir come together to make ajsam, bodies, Right? So all of this indicates originatedness. A sifa, right? Sometimes something can be both a arad and a sifa, which is when you're talking about created things. But Allah's attributes are wajiba, right? So they're not al-arad ma ya'ti wa yazul, right? Ma ya'rudu ala shay wa yazul. That which comes over something and goes. The wall was white, now became pink, right? The cup was full, now became empty, right? So in created things, some things can be both arad and a sifa, right? But a sifa is a ma'na ثابت للشيء للذات وما يحكم به على الذات, right? So, and the sifa can be haditha or qadima. It can be a sifa, an attribute can be originated or eternal. So we say about the attributes of Allah that they're sifat. We do not say that they are a'rad, because intrinsically the mafhum of a'rad is الزائل. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله. We're going to pray.